So there's something I want to get off my chest here about the Far Cry series. You know, and this has been stuck in my head for a little while, but I don't think I've ever voiced my opinion on it in a video, so I'm going to do that here. Far Cry was always a series that you could go to and rely on to give you a different experience with each and every entry. You know, it was very much like the title. Just because like the first game had some certain elements in it didn't mean that the next sequel would have that element in it. You know, and I think the biggest example would be if you look at the first original Far Cry from Crytek. You know, that game where you're stuck on a gorgeous tropical island, and it's a sci-fi game where aliens come and they invade, and it's this crazy thing. You know, and then we have Far Cry 2, and Far Cry 2, you're in Africa, and you know you have to fight off this malaria disease. It's a very realistic game where your weapons break down. You're trying to track down this rogue operative, you know, and then we had Far Cry 3, where you're stuck on this gorgeous island. You're stranded, and you basically get kidnapped by a group of crazy, insane people, and you know, ever since Far Cry 3 came out and the commercial success that Ubisoft had with that game, it was fantastic, absolutely. I feel like Ubisoft has changed the core of the series to sort of be within that niche only. So now it's like when you play a Far Cry game, people don't say like, oh yeah, it's that series that always changes. You know, it's that series that always gives you the new experience. Instead, people say, oh yeah, it's that series with the crazy villains. They always have some crazy villains in Far Cry. But that was like never the case, you know. Far Cry was never about sort of the villains and the characters, you know, and it was always more about the concept and the situation in the world and what's going on basically in the world, you know. And I would have to say that even though with Far Cry 4 they sort of copied the main mechanics of Far Cry 3, I felt like Far Cry 4 was very similar to Far Cry 3. And then Far Cry 5, which was different in terms of its gameplay, absolutely they've enhanced the series, but you know, it still sort of felt remotely similar to that of Far Cry 3, where, you know, it's another villain who's really full of himself, you know, who he has followers and he's sort of crazy, you know, and it's like I always felt that was like that was something that the series it didn't really do that previously, you know. It was sort of like you can go to Far Cry and it would give you a different experience every single time. You would not be able to rely on anything with this series because it was like so drastically different from entry to entry. And I like that about this game because you didn't really know what to expect, and it was a far cry from its predecessor. And that has since changed, you know, since Ubisoft has really commercialized this series. Now, yes, the Far Cry series, I think, is better for it. You always run the risk of, you know, people not really enjoying their experience when you're changing the game up so many times, but with that also comes the lack of innovation here. And I think what we're seeing right now is Ubisoft trying desperately to capitalize, similar to the Assassin's Creed series, on their great FPS franchise known as Far Cry, you know? So that's not to say that these games aren't good, and that's not to say that Far Cry New Dawn is not a good game at all, because I actually think the opposite. I'm actually surprised that a lot of people are sort of shitting on the game as much as they are, because I actually think this is probably one of the most Far Cry games of the whole series, with the respect that they should keep changing up the franchise. You know, this game actually handles drastically different from Far Cry 5. Even though it's the same core gameplay, they've changed up a lot of elements within this game to sort of work within this Far Cry universe here of this post-apocalypse. And it's actually pretty cool because it's something I didn't really expect when I picked this game up. You know, based off the reviews, they would have you believe that, okay, this is basically Far Cry 5 in post-apocalypse. But it's not. It actually is not even remotely that. What this is it's sort of like a light RPG. Imagine, like, you know, some of the Fallout game mechanics, as in like upgrading your weapons, crafting different weapons, you know, upgrading your character with perks. Imagine those mixed in with sort of like the Far Cry gameplay. And, you know, and this is sort of what Far Cry New Dawn is. It's not directly, you know, just Far Cry 5 with a post-apocalypse setting. you actually have different elements here that actually change up the way that you play the game, much more so from Far Cry 5. So let me explain specifically what I mean by that, okay? In previous Far Cry games, you could pick up any assault rifle you wanted and kill basically any enemy in the game. You know, as long as you had ammo, those enemies would go down. But in this game, because again, there's a focus on RPG elements, enemies have a level, and your weapons also have a level system. And so you may be shooting a level 3 enemy with a level 1 weapon, but you be barely doing any damage. And so what this forces you to do, really, is explore the world for craftable items and then craft up higher level weapons so that you could take on higher level enemies. On top of that, the game also forces you to gather resources. For example, in this game, it's ethanol, and this sort of acts sort of like a currency in the game where you could upgrade your home base. And what this means for you is you could have more efficient health packs, so they regenerate more of your health. You could have more weapons available to craft. You could, unlock different areas of the map with, special items in there and different treasure chests and things like that. And so, there's a lot of upgrading that's involved, and you still have the same kind of basic skill tree with the Far Cry series. I will say that this skill tree in particular is much more light on features than the previous Far Cry games. It's not like Far Cry 3 where you're going to have a plethora of different abilities and stuff to upgrade. You basically have a handful only in this game, but they all require you to sort of go out and get necessary or do necessary challenges in order to get those perks and eventually upgrade your character. Although it's not as hard as I'm sort of making it seem right here. But the bottom line here is that, all these things sort of change the way that this game feels. And on top of that, even though this is still technically the same map from Far Cry 5, they've painted the world in such a way and laid it out and changed a lot of things so that it doesn't necessarily feel the same. In fact, besides maybe only a couple landmarks that I remember from Far Cry 5, I'm actually playing through this game and actually not noticing this being the same world whatsoever as Far Cry 5. It's sort of, they put that much effort in it to make it sort of feel like it's its own game, and only like maybe 2 or 3 times have I actually walked into an area and said, oh, I remember this area from Far Cry 5. And so with that respect, it sort of feels like it's almost a brand new world. And it just goes to show the level of, care that they sort of put into crafting this whole thing, and giving it its own flavor. That being said, it is the post-apocalypse here, and so there's a lot of different, weapons here and mechanics that we have to sort of give you a different play style as well. One of my favorite weapons in the game is this sort of slingshot that fires razor blades at people, and these razor blades bounce off the walls, so you can, even though like an enemy or two are hiding behind cover, you can shoot at the wall adjacent to them and have it bounce off and then hit them and kill them, and it's just freaking fantastic. You have these chain kills and everything. It can be really, 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 really cool at times, and then all the weapons here look really, really awesome from an artistic standpoint as well. They all sort of have this makeshift, like you built it in your garage look to it, and I like this element because, even though they're built from basically the same base weapons that were in Far Cry 5, they all have different properties and different feels to them, so it overall, doesn't feel like, oh, you're just shooting a M1911. It's like, no, you actually have a different type of pistol here that has different, elements and, just some cool stuff like that. And so, yeah, I do think that Far Cry New Dawn is getting some unfortunate hate just because of, oh, it looks like Far Cry 5 with the post-apocalypse, but when you really get down and you experience the game, it's like, oh, this is actually nothing like Far Cry 5. In fact, it's more of an RPG than the previous other Far Cry games were at any point. And so there's a lot of different elements. I say the only thing that I think they would have, if they would have added this, it would have been like, wow, you know, this is actually an advancement for the series, is actual dialogue options. You don't have dialogue options in this game. In fact, it's just like Far Cry 5, where your character actually doesn't have an opinion. He doesn't talk. Speaking of your character, there is, I did hear, and I didn't actually do this in the game yet, but I do plan to. I did hear you can actually go out and find your character from Far Cry 5 in this game. That somehow, I guess if you must have to be playing on the same system. I really don't know how this works, but somehow your character is imported from Far Cry 5 into this game. I guess that's how it works. So I'm gonna spend this week and try to find my character, and I'll post a screenshot up on Twitter when I do. But yeah, you know, overall, I think Far Cry New Dawn is a fun game, and I actually think it's it provides a different feel than the other Far Cry games have, for sure. You know, and this isn't like Far Cry 4. This isn't like the same game as Far Cry 3, but like, you know, it just takes place in a different world. In this case, it takes place in the same world technically, but it feels and looks different, much different. And on top of that, there's actually some gameplay mechanics here that, in my opinion, give you a different play style altogether. And because it's focused on RPG elements, again, it's like, you know, you're going to be spending your time crafting, and there's actual purpose to collecting these objects, not so you can just like, oh, I need some objects to heal myself. It's like, no, I want to craft better weapons because I need these better weapons to kill the higher level enemies. And so you have to, you know, sort of change up the way that you play. And I really enjoyed that element about this game. So Far Cry New Dawn, is it worth experiencing? I'd say if you enjoyed the Far Cry games previously, there's absolutely no reason why you won't enjoy this one. It's fun. I think it's a lot more fun than Far Cry Primal and Far Cry 4. And I would say that at times I'm enjoying this game even a little bit more than I enjoyed Far Cry 5. And I thought Far Cry 5 did a good job progressing the series, you know, with its respect to, you know, changing up some core gameplay elements and whatnot. I feel like this one is doing a pretty good job too. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think if you played the game, and have a good one.